listening to all of that. Piers Pigou is the head of the Southern African program at the Institute for Security Studies. Piers, good afternoon to you. It seems, from what I can see at least, that none of the SADC countries have congratulated Mnangagwa on his victory. Does that mean that SADC countries are taking note of what their observer mission has found so far?
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, Stephen. We've seen the president of Tanzania, we've seen the president of Namibia congratulating President Mnangagwa on his victory. They are two of the three members of the organ troika for politics, defense and security. The chairperson is President Hichilema from Zambia, who has resolutely stood behind the observer mission report. So it's a mixed bag out there. We've also seen a number of ruling parties in the region, most notably SWAPO, and of course our very own ANC with Fikile Mbalula demonstrating his own political preferences for ZANU-PF, as he did before the elections when he labelled Chamisa a puppet of the West. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how SADC navigates this space, because SADC is not a unified bloc by any means. And I think the points that Stephen Chan raises are important as to how Zimbabwe is viewed in the region, but it's an uneven view. I think more to the point is that there will be a maintenance of a kind of a broader containment strategy and an attempt to foster a discussion around the structural deficits that the observer mission have raised, and that the mission is also adding to its recommendations that there be some kind of engagement at that level on those issues, and also, of course, pointing those that feel they are aggrieved in the Zimbabwean electoral context to go to the courts. So they're trying to balance their position. The ZANU-PF and government of Zimbabwe's response to SADC's statement has been hysterical in many ways and full of histrionics. The rantings of ZANU-PF spokespeople on Friday, for example, against personalizing this against the head of the observer mission led to a pushback on Saturday by SADC, who backed up their mission and condemned those attacks. Then we saw on Saturday the acting foreign minister in Zimbabwe hauling in the SADC ambassadors to dress them down about their concerns. And today it was the EU member state ambassadors who got hauled in to be told off about what their observer mission was doing. And on top of this, we see a choreographed media attempt to push back, and a lot of the social media trolls also pushing back. So there's a real choreographed effort to neutralize this criticism because it is so significant, as Professor Chan points out.
Isn't the problem that SADC has the same that, confronted then President Thabo Mbeki of South Africa so many years ago? If you've got a country and a government that just refuses to be democratic, there's really very little that you can do. And anything that you do probably makes life harder for the people who, we all know, are suffering enough.
Well, I think you're right in many ways, Stephen. This brings to the fore these realities of the limitations of what SADC can do. And therefore I have a more sort of tempered expectation that they may, this is significant in terms of it being the first time that SADC has made such a statement, but its ability and the political will, the collective political will to follow through on that in a context where the target, the Zimbabwean state and government, is going to use every trick in the book to push back, means that these efforts are likely to be contained and neutralized themselves. So we have President Mnangagwa is going to be the chairperson of the summit troika, not the organ troika, but he's going to be head of the body, head of SADC from August next year. So it's a kind of a strange situation that we find ourselves in, and it will be a supreme test of SADC's credibility in terms of how it handles this matter going forward.
So, there's another issue, which is that Mnangagwa on paper has won the elections. That's still contested, but he says, and the ZDC says he's won the elections. He said that he wanted to work with opposition parties. He wanted to speak to opposition parties. And I'm sort of reminded there was a time, I think, when then President Robert Mugabe had not been in the same room with Morgan Tsvangirai, leader of the opposition as he then was, for a decade, when they started to have to work together. This time around, Mnangagwa sort of comes out of an election that he's won and says he wants to work with the opposition. How do we read that? Is he in a weak position? Is he just saying it for the sake of being magnanimous?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think this is part of the choreographed pantomime that is in play in many respects. We saw him say the same thing at his inauguration at the end of August in 2018, that, you know, he was the president for all the people, etc., etc. But we soon saw a pivot to the kind of exclusionary politics that ZANU-PF, that characterizes ZANU-PF's engagement with the populace outside of its own ranks. So I wouldn't really see that that's a serious commitment, and what he may do is trying to resuscitate his POLAD grouping. I mean, can you imagine, Stephen? He'll have a whole load of presidential also-rans. There's 8 of them this time round, and they constitute all of 150,000 votes. So, I mean, really an irrelevance to the political arena. The only game in town in terms of big politics here is the CCC, and we see that they have rejected the outcome. They say they're going to put evidence on the table that will illustrate major discrepancies between the findings of the ZEC and the realities on the ground in so many areas. And I think this is going to be critical. And our understanding is that the collection of information, whilst haphazard around election results, the V11 story, as we've heard, has actually been much more successful than in 2018. It's haphazard, and this is why it's taking time to pull these things together. But we're told that we can expect tomorrow some greater insights into the information that has been collected. So it's not over yet with respect to a challenge on the evidential basis of the election outcomes. Whether or not, of course, this goes through the courts, I think once bitten or 10 times bitten, now shy, the CCC may or may not go on that route. But I think they certainly will want to play this out in the court of public opinion.
Piers Pigou, thank you. Head of the Southern African Programme at the Institute for Security Studies. Really do appreciate the time.